All right, so we're talking about embedded derivatives. And we chatted about these three particular criterion right here. The economic characteristics are not clearly and closely related. It's not at fair value, and it would be a separate instrument if it was sitting somewhere else. Okay? So let's go through and think about a particular instrument. And we're going to scroll down here a little bit, and we're going to chat about applying the clearly and closely related criterion. You should be reading this. And we're actually going to get into host contracts with debt characteristics. Okay? So these are the things that we want to be looking for, right? So these are the things that host contracts with debt characteristics, and I'm going to focus our attention here on interest rate related underlyings. All right? So let's write down some notes here. So we're talking about embedded derivatives. And we've got our three criterion, right? One, not clearly and closely related. Two, host, or I should say hybrid instrument. Not at fair value. And three, the embedded derivative would be freestanding. Meaning I could go out and get a similar derivative in the open market, not have it actually be in the host instrument. All three of these items, if all three exist, you need to bifurcate. Where we take, here we have the hybrid instrument, and we have to split out the host and the derivative. And those have to be split apart. This is accounted for like you would account for debt, amortized cost. You learned that this past summer. And the derivative would be fair value, changes in fair value, go through the income statement. Okay? We know that. So what would be not clearly and closely related to an interest rate underlying? Well, let's talk about first what is clearly and closely related. So if our interest rate can fluctuate, right? For example, it can fluctuate based on LIBOR, it can fluctuate based on the treasury rate. That fluctuation, those rate changes are clearly and closely related. If there's a cap that's built in, and the cap just simply states that it is a 1% cap on the treasury rate, a 1% cap on the LIBOR rate, that is clearly and closely related. Same thing with a lease. We talk about inflation, so consumer price index. If the consumer price index is driving higher lease payments, that's clearly and closely related. If there's a cap on consumer price index, then again, it's clearly and closely related because I have a cap that says consumer price index can go up, but it can't go up by more than 2%. That's the cap. And so the maximum you can have is a 2% increase if the consumer price index increases greater than 2%. That's clearly and closely related. It's all related to inflation. and you can have those items in the contract. And if they are in the contract and closely related and all of these other things, right? If it's clearly and closely related, it doesn't matter whether or not I have to do these other two things. Because if it's not clear, if it's clearly and closely related, then I don't have to split it apart. Remember, all three of these things have to exist in order to bifurcate. Not just one, all three. So what wouldn't be clearly and closely related? Well, if my interest rate changes based on the changes in the S&P 500, that is not clearly and closely related. So therefore, any cap or floor on that embedded derivative is also not clearly and closely related. If inflation is also based on the S&P 500, that is not an indicator of inflation. That is something completely different. That is not going to be clearly and closely related. All right. These two items, the hybrid instruments already at fair value and the embedded derivative would be freestanding. There's not a lot of judgment with these two items. Right? This is a choice. We are fair valuing the hybrid instrument. We're done. We can look at the embedded derivative and we can say, yes, we could probably find this as a freestanding derivative. This is where the judgment comes into play. This is the clearly and closely related criteria is the bigger problem. Once you have determined that it is clearly and closely related, you no longer have to bifurcate, and however you would have been accounting for the host instrument is how you would account for the hybrid instrument. The exact same way. So if we're dealing with debt and there's an embedded derivative that is clearly and closely related, then we're going to account for the debt at amortized cost as well as the embedded derivative.